Right. Okay. This year's festival has been full of apologies followed by sort of big announcements. It seems that we seem to have actually lost Pathfinder Lester, who was scheduled to be on this panel. So I've actually asked Leah to join us here. Just got a few extra people, so to speak. Anyway, I am joined, of course, by the first person you'll be very familiar with, of course, is Krista Lopez, core developer and inventor of the Hypergrid. You just can't have a Hypergrid panel without Krista on it, can we, Krista? Welcome.
Yes, you can.
Well, yeah.
Just not very well.
Yeah, just not very well. And let's see. Next, he's sort of off on the far side. We have Handheld.
Hello.
And I'm just trying to pull up your profile. Although, why does it never works when you want it, does it? Right, here we are. Now, Handheld was the organizer of something called Avatar Fest. He's the originator and co-organizer, I should say. He's also a writer, a museum curator, and a social media group owner, content creator, and a blogger. And he says those are just some of the hats I've worn during his 8 years out here on the Hypergrid. So welcome, man.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Moving down to Leighton, who's sitting next to me. Winner of Best Hairstyle in OpenSim. Sorry, wrong thing. Wrong one there. Right. Leighton's been part of the OpenSimulator community for about 5 years and is one of the aspects of OpenSim he really likes is the Hypergrid. Well, I think we all agree with that. It's like the killer app. I like to travel around and see the range and variety of creativity that can be seen here. And he has a blog called Hypergrid Traveler. I just need to click the read more bit here, which is fairly recent, which is really a kind of one of the places you can go for destinations and stuff. Sarta Aeon, I believe that's how I pronounce his name. I had originally hoped to be on this panel, but he is traveling and can't make it. But he runs actually a site called OpenSim World, which is another resource for Hypergrid destinations, along with our friend Fredericks, who was on here yesterday, who has Maria Korolov's old site, Hyperica, which again is a good resource. However, enough of my summaries. I'm going to dive straight into our guests and stuff. I said that this conference has been full of big news. I think the main thing that came out literally just this week was the announcement, I guess I'll refer to you here, Leighton, of the the new festival. I was over there looking at your thing earlier and I've already forgotten. But what's the name of your new one? It's not Avatar Fest, it's just
OpenSim Fest.
OpenSim Fest. Okay, I knew it was close. Right, and I noticed Handheld is one of your consultants on that as well, and your partner in it is Bill Blight, who I see in the audience here now. Maybe you'd like to tell us a little about that, because everybody else feel free to chime in, but especially Han, because Avatar Fest this year that Han had been organised was the last one. He's sort of giving up that strand of things, and of course during the last year we have lost, not lost in the real world or anything, but we've lost the presence temporarily, at least, of the Hypergrid Safari, along with Zaremba. So it's kind of a changing point in time. New festivals, and I'll come to it later, but I think there's even a new safari happening of Hypergrid Hoppers, I think they're called. But Leighton, tell us more about the new OpenSim Fest.
I've taken part in Avatar Fest since it really started, and really loved the idea of the community coming together and showing our creativity and building and coming together for events and stuff like that. And it was a sad day when we heard that Han and Erin were gonna kind of leave it this year, so I got together with Bill and Cataplaxia Numbers and we decided to take the reins So we've got a grid and the website is up and running, and we're looking for exhibitors, performers and volunteers like Avatar Fest. So hopefully the transition will be seamless. We've got a booth on Expo 5, booth 6, if you want to come along and say hi. So that's really it.
Indeed, I popped over there a short while ago, and I would point out that is actually on Expo 5. I know that Expo 3 and 4 seem to be the really big ones, so I'll point that out. And you'll be there all weekend, won't you, if people want to drop by. Okay, live performers, live DJs, spoken word storytellers and poets, creative builders and artists, plenty to go there. Now, the date you've scheduled this for is March 1st, 2nd and 3rd of this coming year, 2019, I believe. Have I got those dates right?
Yeah. First, 2nd and 3rd of March.
Right. So it's not actually that far away. And having organised some of these things myself, you think, oh, well, it's 3 months away. But actually, it's not.
That'll go like nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually only 2 months away when you think of it, plus whatever days we got left of this year. Right. Okay. So you describe it as from the ashes of Avatar Fest, announcing it, rising like a phoenix. Well, there you go. But now, didn't we used to have another viewer called? Never mind. Right. The format, the idea, aims of OpenSim Fest will stay true to the Avatar Fest spirit, and we hope to be worthy custodians for Han and Erin. Right now, obviously being a new thing, you are probably looking for volunteers and participants from all over the place. Obviously, live performers, exhibits. Are there any specific things you're looking for volunteer-wise? For example, the average person listening to this or here today might be responsive to, sort of over and beyond performers and booths and stuff.
I think really the volunteer part is kind of for the actual weekend, so meeters, greeters, hosters, people asking questions, but we're also looking for people who would like to post to our social media during the event and running up to it. So it's really, if you want to volunteer, come along, have a chat with us, and if we can find something that you're interested in, then we're more than happy to find you something to do. As there's 3 of us and we're watching the work and the involvement escalating, volunteers may become quite important to us as we go.
Yeah, they do. You sort of, I can tell you tend to sit around.
Every helping hand counts.
Yeah, the last 2
pitches in is really helpful, really matters, makes a huge difference. I can tell you that. And I'm just gonna sit over here. I don't really want to talk over the top of Lighten, but I'm just kind of struck by the fact that one of the things I said when I made my announcement of closing Avatar Fest is that things have changed out here. That includes methodologies, that includes sensibilities, I think. And one of the things that strikes me about OpenSim Fest is that in a lot of ways, I think that it addresses the hypergrid in a contemporary way. So I'm really excited to see this. And I'm really, I'm glad that they invited me to kind of hang out and watch what they're doing. And I'm really looking forward to seeing this unfold. And I'm going to hand it back over to y'all.
Yeah, sure. I imagine you're just so glad to see somebody pick up the mantle, because, we go through these phases and sometimes you think, it's getting very quiet. Isn't anything happening? And then suddenly, all of a sudden, everything happens at once. So
I actually had a pretty good idea that there's, as I think I said in the statement, I'm kind of sucking up the oxygen. So it's like, okay, step back and give someone else a chance. And as soon as I pretty much did that, Lighten and Bill just came up and they're like, we want to do this. I'm like, well, that sounds really great.
Right. Okay.
Now,
now,
happy about that.
Yeah. Right. So over and beyond this, I mean, I've picked up your note card here, so I'm sort of reading bits of it for you. You have a dedicated website already, which is HTTPS, etc. OpenSimFest.org. And I noticed, and I'm very pleased to see this actually, is that you have a dedicated region for it. In other words, it's not on a one of the problems we always have with festivals, I don't know how you have this, Han, and indeed this festival here, in fact, well, if like the Hypergrid Expo, we were on somebody else's grid and we were just a region within it, a lot of people kind of feel that, well, I know it's Hypergrid, but it's sort of, it feels tied to that grid owner or that, whereas when you actually set these things up and you give them a grid of their own, which is non-aligned, I think Hypergrid-wise, people appreciate that a lot more. They don't feel they're being sort of tricked into coming to a commercial grid who will be getting mileage out of them. One thing, we'll come back to, I'm sure that Leighton or somebody can put out a little box here somewhere that those of you in the audience can pick up, or just pick it up from the exhibitor booth, because they do have landmarks for the festival and the festival stage and various other things there. So it looks to me like you're pretty well underway with, the provisional planning of this anyway. Right. Moving on, although we will loop back to this sort of thing, I know, Krista, you have actually brought some slides for this panel too, haven't you? So I'm just thinking, if I hand them over to you, you can show us all the slides, and then we can take it from there.
Why don't you just pass first to Lear? Go on to Lear first, and then I'll go last.
Okay, Lear. My fellow Hypergrid traveller and everything else. I just dragged you into my mate, but have you noticed anything about changing attitudes or obstacles or otherwise in the nature of the Hypergrid, particularly over the last year, or come across things that particularly excite you to do with the connectivity between grids?
Well, for me, it's very stable. I do a lot of hopping because, we have 5 grids just for our research, right? So I'm constantly hopping between them. And then, of course, all around the metaverse. And I notice that I crash very rarely, which is a refreshing
yes.
thing. Now, we are on 0.9, so that's something to mention. At my home grid, which is Virtual Harmony, and it's a research grid. So, but I go to OS Grid, obviously, because I'm wearing stuff from Melody's Garden right now, right? And then, and then I go all over the place for meetings. I go to Kitely, I come here, and I don't have very many problems at all. It's a very smooth experience.
I must say, I'm very much the same. It's I now have my own grid on my desktop. I mean, no residence, it's just me, and you can't join it. I can just TP you in, for shows or stuff. But it's true. My grid's still running at 0.8 something. It's one of Frederick's installs, but.
I think I have some tips.
Right.
One of the tips I have for those who are newer to the Hypergrid, because I'm assuming we have quite a few new folks here. And so for folks who are new, I always try to make sure my outfit is in my suitcase, because if it isn't, unexpected results will occur. Then you'll notice I'm wearing long underwear and a long T-shirt underneath, just in case something goes awry. And that's because I'm an educator and a researcher, right? The last thing I want to do is show up and speak stark naked, right? And then
I can't actually see your long underwear, but I'll take your word for it.
Yep. Well, that's what the green pants are. This outfit has very short pants, right? And anyway, and it's also the notion of being comfortable everywhere you go. See, often few people feel a little stressed because they feel out of control. And when we're in control, it's a very different experience, right? So one thing I've noticed, I can't always use landmarks that I've made, even if they're in my suitcase. But I'm okay with that because I always read the landmark, the about landmark. I always go to the destination point first. I render it, give it just a minute or two, say hi to everyone, and then I move to the region where I want to be, and I notice it's a very smooth experience then.
Yeah, I have certainly found that the actual jumping around, hyper jumping, and stuff like that is incredibly smooth these days. More than it deserves to be in a way. It's I know people who don't come here because they say, oh, Second Life is better and stuff like that. But quite frankly, I find that if I'm going to have problems anywhere, it's usually Second Life. So go figure,
Yes, some of my teleports here are actually a lot faster than in Second Life, and frankly, a very smooth experience. But I have to admit, I use the world map quite a bit. I notice a lot of people don't like to search in it, and even here in OpenSimulator, the community conference, I type OSCC to see all the regions, and then I just wander around through the list. I like to explore and discover, and I don't worry about knowing where I need to go. I usually find people,
Yeah, I often jump to landing areas of grids, even if I'm looking for other locations, and then either search the map for what I want, or even the old follow the green dots on the map. If I set myself so that I can see a hell of a lot of regions at once, and then just jump over to where the green dots are.
You mentioned OpenSimWorld, and I have a lot of great luck with that. Generally, then again, I use the Firestorm viewer, but they usually have the URL, copy it straight to the clipboard, plug it into the map, and as I said, for me, I know some people have problems with that, but that has usually worked reasonably reliably for me.
Yeah, and I know, Leighton, I know, for example, that you, like me, you host your own regions. And of course, if you are in that position, then you can actually drop in the I guess it's inferred now, the Hypergrid guide, so that anybody who's on your grid can actually see a destination guide that is the Hypergrid destination guide, as well as standard landmarks and stuff. So we do actually have quite a lot of sources, as I say, as well as your blogs, Leighton. Coming up, so to speak, I want to talk about the auxiliary networks that we use, like Discord and things, to enhance our communications ability across the Hypergrid, as it were. And I'd also like to talk about, and just in advance, your thoughts, though I'll ask Krista when she talks now too. One thing I have noticed that is a slight glitch to me in the Hypergrid, in the sense of the spirit of it, is that the last few months, a lot of grids have felt compelled to have you register and comply with the GDPR regulations, which oddly enough, the grids that want this compliance seem to be mostly non-European grids rather than European grids, and the legislation is European. But just one thing, it's almost as though customs and passport control and things have come into the notion of hypergridding. I jump around, and I arrive on a grid and it's fine, the hypergrid over. That's what it was always all about. But now, more often than not, I land on a grid and I get a pop-up message saying I've got to go to their website and register so that I give them permission to see my assets or something like that. And I don't want to go into the legalities of it per se. I think it's really overblown because this is really for targeting really big Facebooks and Googles. But it seems to me that in a way is spoiling the feel of the Hypergrid. One of the first things I had to do was re-register with the Great Canadian Grid, where before I ran my own grid, I had my TV studios and everything. And it was really a bit annoying. It only took me about 30 seconds or a couple of minutes to do. But if every destination on the Hypergrid I want to visit, it makes me do that, it is a real hindrance to the idea of free travel around the metaverse. So I thought I'd just get that in, so that not now, but after Krista speaks, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that, if indeed you've got any. So, Krista.
Yes. I was figuring out what to say in this panel, and I went back to my archives, and I found an old presentation from 2010. And it just, threw me down memory lane, and I thought I'd go through some of the slides here, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely lovely.
Okay. So, for some of you who are either new to OpenSim or, new to virtual worlds altogether, the idea of the Hypergrid was born as a reaction to this concept that every virtual environment was its own walled garden, and you had to have accounts everywhere, just like you see it on the web, right? You see this on the web, but you have to have your separate accounts everywhere. So I thought this was a really great opportunity to do some experimentation with identity and a portable identity, and the idea of making an interoperability protocol in which you can have an account in some virtual world, and then you can travel around other virtual worlds that are controlled by completely different people and in completely different parts of the world. So that was sort of the reaction. And Second Life had actually a really good cues to being able to do that and how to do that, because they opened up the client server protocol. There was a lot of data that was available, so you will know that. So the idea behind the Hypergrid was to do not to bring 3D content to the web, but the other way around, to bring some characteristics of the web to the virtual world. So basically, literally have a web of virtual worlds. And, so the big picture was something like that you have these virtual worlds, and somehow there's these links that you can jump around, and you have your own identity, and you go and you preserve, the identity is preserved throughout these different links. Yeah. So that's the idea. Although, let me go quickly through. I'm not even going to stop in these other things over here. I just wanted, one thing that kind of warmed my heart was to look at the vision that I had back then in 2008, and to look at what's happening right now in front of my eyes. It's quite rewarding. So I actually found these slides that I had done. Let me jump around. So see some visions. This was when the Hypergrid was still in complete experimental code. Didn't even exist as such beyond my development machine. But this was, the vision of what I had is that how do you interact? Well, you have your own grid, and maybe you link to some of your personal grids that you also use, like your friends standalone, some major grids like OSCC18, some business grids. So we have this, right? This is happening. This is exactly what's happening. Or another use case is that many people have their own private islands, maybe running in their home machines or something, and it's somehow they come together in this community grid, which is also happening. It tends to be OSCC18 or others, right? Or this one, the convention center grid, or some others like the OpenSim fests and others that pop up where just everybody decides to go. So this is also happening. This is really amazing. And there's also issues of security, that you can block some parts of your grids to foreign visitors, and only the local users can go there. Again, this is also all happening. So I am really, as I was looking through these old presentations that I made in 8 years ago, I was thinking, wow, okay, this is one of the things that I envisioned, and it's actually happening out there. So I'm absolutely thrilled to see all these activities on top of the Hypergrid, and in a way, it's kind of sad that many of the large closed grids are sort of shutting down. I was kind of sad when I heard that Outworlds was closing, and Avination, of course, closed a few years ago. But on the other hand, I'm really thrilled that the Hypergrid seems to be the glue that kind of maintains the community. It's a technology that really supports the community, and that's, I think, the vision that we all had and that was realized through this protocol. And, in many ways, I think we're doing it better than the web does because we have this federation, and it was baked in almost from the beginning of OpenSim. The web didn't have that, and now they're trying to patch it in sort of backwards. So anyway, I'm very glad to see all this stuff happening in this community, and I've been away for a couple of years from development, not because there aren't any bugs, but because there's
needed a break.
I was hoping that somebody else would fix the remaining bugs, but also because I've been thinking a lot about what's the next big step, and I'm a little better at doing big things than the little things. So the big step is definitely the viewer, and we need a better viewer, and with a better viewer, there's probably going to be a lot of rewrites on the server, and possibly complete rewrite of the server, and breaking things on the server side too. So we'll see how that goes.
That has definitely been the big news, especially yesterday. It was the talk of the town, the conference. I mean, yeah. Well, I thank you, Krista, because this. It must be great to look back on that sort of framework, the groundwork you've done here, and seeing it persist. Do you? I actually remember filming you in Second Life long before I think OpenSim exists, where I forget where it was you turned up, but you were actually physically prototyping the.
That's right.
The Hypergrid. Just standing there, and
I was actually looking. Yeah, I was actually looking for that picture on my computer. I couldn't find it. I found this presentation instead, because that little object that I did as a 3D prototype of the Hypergrid was even more.
Yeah, and it was the different layers and scattered about, and and actually the fun thing filming was I was watching you standing there with your avatar hand in the air, and the beam coming out as you built it in front of everybody.
That's right.
And it just worked because it was very graphical representation of something that was intimately 3D. You could never have drawn that.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, you touched on something that I think is really interesting: the problems of identity and what they're doing on the web right now, and all of these pop-ups that are starting to plague both the web and apparently OpenSim. I actually haven't visited any grid that has those pop-ups, but those are kind of tough issues, I think, and we all need to figure it out. I think there's something to be said about consent to share the data. That we need to be mindful, and I guess we'll just have to think about a little bit more carefully how to make it a better experience.
If we're moving to just a bit of addition to the code, but also fundamentally changing viewers. If there was, Tim Berners-Lee is working on. He's taken time off to work on this thing, which is meant to re-decentralize the web. And he's talking about pods and things, and a framework called Solid, which offers a lot of security and sort of takes the power of your permissions back to you instead of giving it away to others. And I'm just wondering if the structure of the Hypergrid is such, whether the sites that are obliging us to sign the GDPR thing. A debate whether it's necessary anyway. I don't have a lawyer on hand here, but there's different interpretations. But I'm just wondering if the security protocols within the Hypergrid itself could adapt to something like that. So you simply have like a passport that has got the thing saying, "I agree."
Yeah, I think that could definitely be done. That could definitely be, instead of bothering the person every time that the person goes around. That it is possible to actually bother the person's identity service too, and then the person just needs to say the policies at one point in time, and then those policies will hold for a long time.
universally rather than just on one grid. Okay, well, let's move back to general conversation. That was wonderful, Mr. Everybody else here, have you also had any thoughts on the way this business, principally, of course, with GDPR, though there have been other instances of where, grids on the open system of the hypergrid do actually want to impose particular restrictions on you. But that can normally be done server side in geography terms, I think. Any thoughts?
One thing I'm finding interesting, and this is anecdotal, don't take this as a professional anything, but in my experience running around the hypergrid, which may or may not be affected by tunnel vision or tunnel social input or whatever, I'm not running into as many of the GDPR notices as you would think. I could probably rattle off the grids that I have run into them at, as opposed to the ones I haven't. The ones I haven't are a larger number. So that's just been my completely off-the-cuff anecdotal experience, which a year in is fairly interesting.
I'm pretty much the same, which is I really am grateful for, because to be honest, I'm very ruthless. I mean, if I teleport somewhere and they want me to sign something or anything to get in, then I just say bye-bye and not going back there again. Simple as that. I object to that interference. It's like I haven't got time to take my cutters to your fence. I'm going elsewhere instead. And there are hundreds.
And I think you probably, it's really interesting. Can I cut in here? I find it fascinating that you, Mal, you personally, who are a fixture in this community, feel that way. If you feel that way, being aware as you are of all the issues and being a part of this, seeing the history and all that, someone from Second Life, what are they going to feel? What are they going to think? They're going to think exactly the same thing. They're going to be like, why do you want me to bother? What do you want me to what? Why are you sending me to this website? You want me to authentic what? So I think that's really interesting. I think that's something that, yes, the legal issues are very real. The fines are very real, but we got to figure out, okay, how are we going to make it up to the users? How are we going to draw them in? How are we going to convince them it's worth it?
I think it's like Second Life. The first time you go in there, it's a walled garden, so you've got to sign up to their terms of service and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
But you only do it once. This is why I was asking Krista about the idea of a passport that has a hypergrid-wide visa on it that protects you.
Yeah.
Well, who would establish that legally? That was the problem.
Yeah, it would have to be something in the system that is, I suppose, a bit like a terms of service, but you only ever sign it once, and it applies to everybody on the hypergrid. I mean, I'm trying to catch up. I have great difficulty talking and reading messages at once, but I noticed Bill Blythe himself actually says you haven't got time to allow a grid owner to protect themselves. And of course, there is the other side of this.
Again, that's looking at the grid owner's point of view. You have to sell it to the users, or the users walk away.
Yeah. I do. What I'm looking for there is the sort of Leighton, you of course work with Bill quite a lot here, I presume. And I've had him on our show, so I've spoken to him about various things in the past. But I think I may be wrong. I think his OpenSim Life, isn't it? I think is Bill's grid. I think that may be one of the ones that does need the permission thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm when I say I find this annoying, and I see it and I see the wall and I walk away. Rather than spend an hour or two opening the door. You're right, that is me, and I think I'm very typical of it.
What we should this is something that can definitely be done on the server side. We ought to be able to have the users can specify the policies on their home grids once, and then the teleport should be seamless. Right. We ought to be able to do that.
Okay, absolutely. Well, we'll leave this argument for another day. But I would point out that I'm not neglecting grid owners in this. I'm just saying that from the user point of view, it's surprising how one little thing can actually create obstacles for people, which with greater impact than you might realize.
If I could just say something quickly, Mal, before you move on.
Please. Yeah.
I'm an online counsellor and psychotherapist, so kind of data protection and the GDPR are part of my landscape. So I kind of understand it from two perspectives, really. Yes, it is demanding as a user to authorize, but it really is about the user feeling that they're in charge of who is accessing their data, what we're doing with it, what we do with it when we're done, those types of things. So it's really to be more aware of what data we are giving to who and what we expect them to do with it. I find the pop-ups annoying, but I understand the mechanics behind it, if that makes sense. And I think as community influencers, we have to be careful about how people may take what we say about certain things. Does that kind of make sense?
Yes, it does. Absolutely. I mean, in a sense, we've always had this problem with people worrying about security on OpenSim and particularly on the Hypergrid. And a lot of it comes down to our inventory and our assets, because when we're on our own grid, that is very much a fixed thing. You just pull things out and put them away and do what you want. But the moment you start traveling, whether you tend to be fairly reliant on having what you're traveling with in your suitcase, but although some grids, of course, still don't have the suitcase. But the reality is, as your avatar and its luggage makes the hyperjump to a different server on a different machine somewhere in the world, not even owned by the same company or person, then your suitcase, your inventory is to a certain extent going with you, because you need to be able to access certain things if it's only the clothes you're wearing. And at that point, everybody says, oh, well, that's insecure, because the moment you enter somebody else's grid, the owner can see all the assets and they can steal your hat and glasses and underwear and anything else that you're carrying with you. And so, that's often been referred to. And I can see, for example, that signing a permission thing is really like saying to a grid you're visiting, saying, I do grant you permission to sort of snoop into my suitcase while I'm here. Maybe tell them, no, you can't binge anything, or maybe you can. But, the control systems for this, there's always been a kind of need for it. But I think in the spirit of what Christopher's built of the hypergrid and the way we all work, I think anything that impacts the user to a greater extent than it facilitates, them is rather a problem. But let's move on. I'm actually going to come back to you, Leighton, but anybody else, feel free to come in here with questions, especially Leah. I mentioned Ferd Fredericks's sort of Outworlds thing. Oh, by the way, I'll point out it's not Outworlds that's gone. You're thinking of Inworlds. And
that's right. That's right. Sorry.
Yeah. That's
I want to say thank God for Fred. That Outworlds is just, that is like the most amazing thing. Just
it's changed everything.
Sorry,
going to just fanboy over here.
I got the worlds with the Z confused.
Yeah, I know. Too many Z's around, really, aren't there? This is something actually I remember last year, and actually on multiple occasions, both Pathfinder and I have always gone on about, because, this is the obvious way to work. You install, a simulation on your desktop, and that's where you live, and you go elsewhere by Hypergrid and you come back by Hypergrid. Why do you need all the other things? Now, obviously, if somebody is mobile a lot and on different IP addresses and laptops and things, then, they can't actually necessarily have the server software running from where they are. So there are, commercial grids and non-commercial, but bigger grid, community grids have a whole place in that structure. But Pathfinder always kept saying to me that he agrees, and that's the way we think. But try and tell some newcomer coming for Second Life what all that's about. They don't really understand. Unlike, say, High Fidelity, when you install the software, they install the local sandbox and server for you. And it's done, and you never know it's there unless you investigate. Whereas with OpenSim, of course, all we install is a viewer and the need for a server login address. So the idea that you're in your own machine, like you live in your own house, and then go out for a walk or travel somewhere and then come back. I like that kind of metaphor. And it also, the other thing is, again, with security, I feel that if my inventory and all my assets are in my own machine on my own grid, then I just feel instinctively more secure, because when I go out, it's my choice whether to give things to somebody or stuff like that. I am aware, of course, that people can once I.
Well, you're not agreeing to let someone put a camera in your pocket that they can listen in when you go home and look around when you're going into your bathroom. That's kind of with the internet, a lot of what we're finding, or a lot of what is going on.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, back in the old days, a lot of people of my generation were horrified at the thought of identity cards. But long before the web and anything like that, probably even long before the chip and pin in the bank, we just thought that was the oppressive state, But I must say, my attitude to that was I just loved the idea, right, of a kind of ID card, because I thought, well, I can program it with everything I want and then carry that information about and offer it to people when they need it. But it never occurred to me that it would develop the other way around, which is where the external parties are doing all the putting my information in. And after time, I go to try and look up my data, and I'm told, oh, you can't access your own data. It's, belongs to the government.
Or Facebook, Zuckerberg.
Yeah, Facebook,
all of exactly. Not just all the stuff that you do on Facebook, but on Spotify, on Amazon, just, it's like this conglomerate, because they do track and trace what you do everywhere. And then there's the whole shadow profiles, which even if you don't have a Facebook account, you have a Facebook account. It's creepy as hell. Or forgive my language there, but you get what I'm saying.
So there's no such thing as 6 degrees of separation anymore. We all one,
or even one. It's like,
if you're not on Facebook, you think it's no problem. But if you've got
you are on Facebook. If you're not on Facebook, you're on Facebook.
Yeah, if you've got a friend who's on Facebook, you're on Facebook too.
Exactly. Yep.
It's as simple as that. So you can't get away with it. I just take great delight in the only thing I ever post to Facebook are Facebook's articles critical of Facebook. And it's not. I want
to make a point here, if you'll forgive me. It isn't simply Facebook. I don't want to go in on let's bash Zuckerberg. No, it's Google. It's Amazon. If we obliterated Facebook today, there's 3 companies I can think of that would step in and fill the void: Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, and probably more than that.
Yeah, and absolutely. I mean, it's I think for Facebook gets the dirt, I think, mostly because they've got a very overt attitude, shall I say, rather than a covert attitude to that. And, they were early and they got ridiculously big really fast. But yes, you're right, Google and Microsoft. I can't stand Microsoft. I think Microsoft are worse than Facebook in many ways. But anyway, we're not here to go into that. I'll get myself into trouble. It's okay on my show, but not here. Right. Leighton, I'm going to come back to you because one of the other things that you've sort of, there are 2 things really developed recently, I should say. One is H3 Traveler, your blog, which is publishing a lot of, records of destinations and things like that. So you, in a way, are providing a curated service that, whereas something like OpenSim World and Hypergrid are strict listings, you are sort of doing a sort of thing that is curating on the same level. You're recording where you go and telling people about it. But also, secondly, you've exemplified what the Hypergrid is about, because, of course, you do run different grids. You've got Out and Proud, for example, is a very specific grid, and you would never probably easily see that in a walled garden place like Second Life, or even as a major grid in its own right. But because of the Hypergrid, you're able to build and expand something like that within a greater network without not a second thought. Nobody's going to come along and say, hey, we're rednecks, we don't approve of it. So, you very much typify in some ways what, possibilities there in what you're doing. So I don't know, maybe you'd like to summarize both the grids you've got and the blogs you've got.
Yeah, Hypergrid Traveller is a culmination of a long arc that started when I first arrived, because when I came to OpenSim, I was in Second Life probably a couple of months, and kind of didn't really get on with it. And I found OpenSimulator and have loved it ever since. I've very rarely kind of go into Second Life. I did a master's in virtual education there that kept me going back in there. But one thing I found about OpenSimulator is I just loved the idea of being able to move around different grids, different regions, because they all have their own little quirks and looks and appearances and appeals to different community groups. So Hypergrid Traveller is the culmination of that. I didn't want it to be a kind of another online directory, because I kind of want to know, well, what did you think about it when you got there? Did you enjoy it? Did you dislike it? What was it about that? So I kind of went for more of a travel log feel. So I'm talking to, there's person of interest interviews. I've spoken to some people and interviewed them, asked them some questions. There's also region reviews, there's shopping, there's all sorts of things. So I just wanted to kind of bring all the information together in one place, because I found that a lot of it was scattered everywhere. And you kind of had to route around, and being and living in a networked environment like OpenSim, everything isn't at hand, so you have to route around and dig, and for new people that might be quite tricky to start with. So there's kind of like the welcome regions for all the grids. I've got all like listings, and so it's a kind of a one-stop shop travel log, and that's pretty much it. And my Out and Proud grid is an LGBT community, just to kind of wave the pride flag over the Hypergrid.
Yeah, indeed. And of course, as you say, it's psychotherapy and things that you do as well, which of course is, another way of using, a smaller region on the Hypergrid for a very specific kind of task. In your case, a very social task. So in another case, it might be just somebody wanting to open up a meeting house for a book club that only ever reads the works of one author. It can be as big or as small as you like, and that is really the beauty of it. And also always open to expansion. Start with 4 regions, end up with 400. If you need them.
And I think it gives a great entry point for communities that are just forming, because you don't have obviously all the huge server overheads and all that sort of thing. So you can really start small and build up over time, and you don't have the problem of assets suddenly disappearing or the grid going down and stuff like that. So I think it's a great community tool, and because
our loans expired, we gotta close the grid in 3 weeks. And
I think what I love about it is you can kind of do lots of things with OpenSim. So you can set it up in a very secure way for things like counselling, psychotherapy, mental health services, those types of things, or you can have a wide open configuration. And I like that kind of capacity to move between those different setups.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as Maria Kovalev used to say, we got the dark metaverse, we talk about OpenSim stats and everything else, but after, there is a lot happening out there that is deliberately off the Hypergrid for privacy or purposes or whatever. And, we don't know almost the extent of what is out there. We tend to only know what is public. So,
and that's great. We don't know, that's a
good,
wonderful part of freedom. I had a thought there and then I lost it. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, I'm just looking at my clock and I got a feeling somebody's going to be telling me you've got a few minutes left in a second. So a couple of things to get in here. I'm terrible at reading audience questions. Leah may be very good at that, so I'm going to ask Leah in a second if she's seen any pertinent questions to finish with. The other thing I wanted to get in here, right, is that the OpenSim community, the users as such, really got kind of sad a bit about the closure of Google Plus. It hasn't happened yet. It's still 10 months away. But there was this thing of looking for other sources. And a lot of, Google Plus, it really annoys me a bit because I tend to find it gives me a lot of spam because you friend a person on Hypergrid and they like, posting about all sorts of things nothing to do with the virtual world. And the same with the groups. A lot of people have gone to MeWe, which actually looks more like Facebook, but behaves a lot more like Google Plus. And I find it more satisfying, but actually prone to some of the problems with Google Plus. But something I did, I guess it was back, I was talking with Pathfinder and Thurza earlier in, was it this year or last? I can't remember, to be honest. But I'd had a private, a corporate Discord server for a while. And suddenly I thought, well, let's make a bigger one, which is Hypergrid wide, so that people, in the absence of being able to communicate properly over the Hypergrid with voice and text, we could at least have a server on Discord that, it's got all the news and things like that. But then I've created channels as required, when and as required, for any individual grid that wants a channel in that main server. And its whole function really is to bring the whole Hypergrid together insofar as grids and people on the Hypergrid want to come together. And I noticed that increasingly, I think I'm not sure where both you and Han have started your own Discord servers, as have indeed many grids. Now, my final question to you before we just check for last minute questions elsewhere is how you all feel that, these auxiliary services are helping push the Hypergrid, particularly Discord, of course. So let me start with you, Leighton, again, and I'll move to Han and on.
I quite like Discord. I'm actually managing to get to quite a few events through postings on there, and it's a nice kind of layer between social media and kind of in world. I think it's a really nice. I see a lot of kind of communities kind of talking offline and kind of, but it's not distinct from in world. It's linked to their communities, and I think that's a really good thing.
Absolutely. Han, you of course are familiar with it too.
Yeah, I feel really positive about Discord. It seems to be more focused in that you have the different groups. They tend to either moderate what is going on or they create separate rooms. So you've got here's our lolcats in this room, here's our event notices in another room, so you can find what you want, as opposed to like Facebook, where it's just all kind of dumped on you. So I think Discord's wonderful. I think, how do you pronounce it? MeWe, the other social media place?
It's just
they have the same problem of it being a giant hot mess that Facebook has, at least in my opinion. So I didn't really care for that. But Discord is, I'm getting a lot of use from it. I'm getting the same organizational managerial use from Discord that I used to get from G+ in like 2016, 2017.
Right. Okay. So we're very serious to the wrap up here. So I don't think you're on Discord, Krista, so I won't ask you about that. Leah, just quickly, yes or no for Discord? It's good, isn't it? Words in your mouth. Leah?
Yes, hi. I didn't know if you'd asked Krista. We had 2 or 3 questions. We're really not going to be able to get to them, but Amber did ask about Hypergrid transfer items and performance when folks come and get items, and of course the performance lag on her grid. And then Stone asked about Hypergrid security, so we might want to think about that in the after our session chat. Sure. And as far as my concerns, I just want to wish everyone a great conference and keep hypergridding. Over to you.
Okay. There's no easy way to post it out to you, but if you download the Discord program, the other thing about it is a wonderful alternative to the rapidly disintegrating program called Skype. it is very much a personal Skype as well as a sort of server channel system. Right, so that's it. If you are looking it up, look up Hypergrid Explorers and Creators. That's our Discord channel there. Now, I really do have to close this. I hate doing this. It always gets exciting towards the end, but I really have to do it because there's another panel coming up afterwards. So to wrap, I'd like to thank Handheld. Thank you, Han.
Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate coming.
Okay, I would like to thank, as always, Krista Lopez. Thank you, Krista. I'd like to thank Leighton Marjoram. Thank you, Leighton.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Pleasure.
And thank you to Leah, of course. So we'll see you next year. And, of course, don't forget, the conference continues. Bye for now.